This week on episode 291 of the Cinema Psycho Show, John and I are time-traveling back to the 1930s to examine the legacy of the Universal monster movies.
Oh, goody, goody, here it comes.
Welcome to the Cinema Psycho Show.
You are interested in the unknown, the mysterious, the unexplainable. That is why you are here.
Oh, my God, don't stop now!
With your hosts, Brian, John, and Elaine.
Welcome to the Cinema Psycho Show, the madhouse for film freaks and film fans of all types. I'm your host, Brian Collington, joined by my fellow co-host and filmmaker, John Woolscroft.
I got this original idea for a movie.
Okay.
It's in a faraway land. It's a dark and stormy night.
Yeah.
People have no choice but to go to that castle on the hill.
Yeah.
That's run by that peculiar man that nobody really seems to know all that much about. So you follow me so far? This sounds
Yeah.
So you've never seen this
I've never
before.
seen that before.
No.
I've never seen
Yeah.
that before. And honestly, I don't think that would work.
Nah.
I don't think it would work.
Wouldn't stand the test
Yeah.
of time for nearly 100 years.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Well, this week we're, if you didn't catch what we're alluding to, we're talking this week about something I'm surprised we haven't talked about this before.
Yeah.
Is the legacy of the Universal monster movies.
Yeah. And if you pick this episode at random, we are here at the Erie Horror Fest.
Yep.
If you're picking up any background noise here.
That's why.
Yeah,
That's
there's
why.
a lot of things going on. We got vendors all around us, people enjoying themselves. But yeah, I'd be very interested as we kind of break down these movies to kind of talk about how do, the last 80 to 100 years, how do these characters have this lasting legacy? Because there's so many things to look at. Is it because the stories were so good? Is it because they were reused and, in like Dracula and the Hammer horror films? Like, every couple of years they're revitalized. Is it marketing? Is it just that, like, are they synonymous with the Halloween season? So, marketing can use them for root beer commercials and things like that. So how is it that when you say Universal monster movies, not only do everybody know what you're talking about, but it's also Universal monsters. It's not Warner Brothers Batman. No one says that. But Warner Brothers has always owned Batman, but you go, oh, those Warner Brothers Batman movies. No, you don't. You don't say that, but you do say the Universal monster movies of the 30s and into the early 50s.
There's a lot also when it pertains to the history of just, the country at the time when these movies came out. I think the first thing to really talk about is just these movies came about amidst the Depression and the stock market crash and really horrible things happening to people around the world. I mean, you also could bring up these movies came about during the rise of fascism in Germany and the prelude, and even in some cases, move into World War II. So, a lot of things happen here. And I think one of the big things that a lot of people bring about when you talk about Universal monster movies is that these movies served as escape. These were escape movies for an audience that was, at the time, really dealing with some heavy shit.
I would also say that on a slightly cynical edge, fear of the unknown, fear of the other, and but also but fear of lack of control that these people had in their lives. Like there was like two things that people would still spend money on when they didn't have any money, like booze and movies. They would still go to the movies.
And they spent that money on booze even when they were told you can't spend money on booze anymore.
But the use of gothic horror based on literary and folklore characters. So, I mean, these stories, a lot of them are older than even the movies. So that's even greater sense of
they were
time.
novels. They were novels that were, hundreds of years old in some cases.
But being willing to dare to make something that kind of macabre type material back then ended up, defining an era. And I think these films have two distinct kind of characters. They have the one, human characters that discover, or inhuman characters that discover humanity, and humans who are stripped of their humanity.
Explain.
Yeah. What's that?
Explain.
So you have like somebody like Dracula. He's an inhuman character who comes across humanity, or the creature from the Black Lagoon. But then you have somebody like the Wolfman or the Invisible Man, who are human but are stripped of that for for reasons, usually some kind of science reason.
Science or curse in some cases,
Right,
that sort of thing.
And just to give a little history here of Universal Studios, they are actually the oldest surviving film studio in the United States. They were founded in 1912, but they were never a big player during Hollywood's golden age. In fact, they were one of the little three alongside Columbia and United Artists.
Yeah.
But once appetites for, the, for lack of a better term, grotesque began to, in the 20s, the studio began to focus its energy on producing and pioneering the horror genre. That's one of the main reasons that they're really known for it. I think they were one of the only studios making horror films.
Oh, the ones that were American made. I think that's the important point of distinction is that the horror film really, you could point to Einstein's Frankenstein as the first official one. A lot of people do.
Yeah.
But I mean, the films of Murnau made in Germany at the time, like Nosferatu and even Fritz Lang and Metropolis and Count of Dr. Caligari and all these ones. These were German expressionist films that were highly, differentiated from the stuff that Americans were seeing. You were still at the time seeing movies that were just broad extensions of movies that a couple of years ago were just, let's get a film of a train coming in.
Yeah.
But no plot.
Actualities.
Actualities, right?
Yeah.
So like Germany and a lot of, European cinema were really the driving force of the horror side of things. And, that's where I think a lot of the grotesque was coming from. Then you come to Universal, and what do they come out with? They come out with Phantom of the Opera with Lon Chaney Sr. I would say
Hunchback of Notre Dame.
And Hunchback of Notre Dame. I'd say these movies, they were in the golden age of old Hollywood, a silent age, but they offer the audiences a taste of that European sensibility from those horror movies that Germany, but through an American lens.
And you do
tribute to Carl Laemmle for honestly that one.
Yeah. And you do hear a lot of people like, oh, they were vomiting watching The Exorcist, or they ran out of the theater during Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But when they take the mask off the Phantom, and what Lon Chaney did, which probably wasn't even all the safest way of doing makeup.
No, the man was a madman and a wizard.
Yeah,
and I give huge props to him for putting his body through so much. Yeah, all in the search of looking for the scariest thing to show audiences.
But just for the actual gasp, and I do believe that those stories are true.
Oh, yeah.
That people freaked out.
Yes.
When they saw him. But one of the key things about these movies is sympathy for the devil, so to speak. The monsters in the best ones, you have sympathy for them. And in the early days before the film Hays Code, they really pushed that aside. Because Lon Chaney himself said, and I quote, "I wanted to remind people that the lowest types of humanity may have within them the capacity for supreme self-sacrifice. The dwarf, misshapen beggar off the streets may have the noblest ideals. The importance of humanity behind the horror helped color the studio's approach to its movie monsters. It was a philosophy that elevated Universal above their rivals in classic horror movie making."
I buy that.
Yeah. And it really much depends on the films, because if we really go to, what were the first big two that came out the same year, and that was Dracula and Frankenstein.
And very different movies.
Yeah, Dracula.
Very different movies.
Dracula is basically unforgiving or unforgivable, and Frankenstein, you can feel for him because he's just a giant baby that doesn't understand what's happening.
I think a lot of that comes from the source material of each one of those, I mean, Dracula, which out of all the Universal monster movies, Dracula is my favorite because I love vampires. Like, it's my thing. But whereas later movies injected humanity into Dracula, Bela Lugosi's Dracula is none of that.
Right.
He is an embodiment of sex. And that's it. Like, he's just an embodiment of sex. And also, you could say fear of the other, fear of the European influence.
Well, I feel like we can't talk about Dracula without talking about anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I can buy that one.
Yeah, the whole idea of the European outsider invading white Britain.
Yes.
He is the embodiment of Victorian England's fear of the Jew.
Oh, yeah.
Judith Halberstam put it this way. his peculiar physique, his parasitical desires, his aversion to the cross and to all trappings of Christianity, his blood-sucking attacks, his avaricious, relation to money, resembled stereotypical anti-Semitic 19th century's representation of the Jew.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think they ever intended that for the movie, but it's in the book.
It's in the book, absolutely, and yes, and every version has those elements in there.
Yeah.
Like every version of Dracula does. But I mean, I think the puritanical sensibilities when it comes to sex is a big one with Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
It's no surprise that his means of infecting people is with sharp, pointy projectile things.
Yeah.
That come at you at
I'm
night.
going to insert you.
I'm going to insert you, and I'm going to infect you. So it's obviously that's there. And I mean, we mentioned a little bit about Murnau, but you look at what ended up being the horrible propaganda of Jewish people in Germany in the 1930s, and they very much look very similar to the Max Schreck Nosferatu.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not on accident. That's
right.
just they pulled from the book, I guess you said.
It will be interesting to go, as we go a little bit closer to the 40s, talking about the Wolfman, which is very much an allegory for Jewish persecution, so going the other way. Yeah. But just kind of going in order, I do think the beginning of Frankenstein is very funny, because the guy comes out on the stage to kind of be like, hey, don't be mad at us. Don't get too scared. It reminds me of Marge Simpson at the beginning of Treehouse of Horror.
I think
they kind of homage that.
It was an homage to that. Yes, that's exactly what it was.
It's very interesting that the way that they took Frankenstein of very much diverging from the book. Because like Frankenstein was actually pretty well spoken and hated what had been made of him, but in the movie, Dr. Frankenstein like saves the day and gets back with his lady at the end, because there was still a certain amount of rules you had to abide. The monster can't win, or monster can't be too right. So let's just take all of his brain away.
Yep.
And just make him a bumbling monster.
It's funny you bring up about the divergence from the book, because we just mentioned about how Dracula has some elements from the book that are still there. But even Dracula, along with Frankenstein, they're pulling like the characters from that book. But Dracula came from the Broadway play. It didn't the version that we see in 1931. That's the Broadway play, and even Bela Lugosi was an actor in that Broadway play. Mm-hmm. So you're getting, it's funny because we look now at movies that we watch, and oftentimes we're going, well, it's not from the source material. But even back then, they didn't give two shits about the source material. It's the ones that are ones that we care about that have stood the test of time, very much diverted from that. And I think there's something to be said for that, because it's injecting a different point of view of that source material through a cinema lens.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of too is if you look at the movie code at the time, there's I think my favorite term it goes into that is upsetting ideas, which is such new
so
double
broad.
speak. It's such Orwellian, because I think the idea of making the monster like not have really much thoughts is that it makes it okay for him to be burned alive. Well, what we think is killed at the beginning of the movie. Or at the end of the movie.
He's just singed.
Yeah. Because, it's like upsetting ideas, like basically says, if you have to think. Oh, no.
Oh, no, I had to think.
So, I think that the Hays Code plays a lot into that, too.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, they changed, like, the end of it. But then, when you do get Bride of Frankenstein, it's very interesting that this movie was written by, surprisingly for the time, a very open homosexual.
Yeah.
And and it's so funny to me to see things from outside, your own, like, knowledge set or comfort zone. Like, when I first saw, many years ago, articles written about, like, queer theory on Bride of Frankenstein, I'm like, what? But it's his wife. I don't understand. So I had to educate myself quite a bit on what that really meant. And I don't know about you, but Bride of Frankenstein is 10 times better than Frankenstein.
I was going to ask that question because I'm in the same boat where I really you watch the first Frankenstein because it's the first Frankenstein. You watch it because it's the first time that you get Boris Karloff. But if you had to ask me which one's the superior story,
Yeah.
it's Bride of Frankenstein.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not even talk about the whole, like, what the hell, the other professor who's in it, Pretorius, and his weird, like, tiny minion characters.
Yeah.
Like, I still don't, I don't know why he's like, I've tried to create life too. Look, I made little characters, little people.
It's like the little guy that falls around the scientist on South Park.
Yeah. but like, barring that very bizarre, like, change from it,
Yeah.
it's a far superior movie. One, the monster fucking talks.
Yeah. That was ballsy for them
Which-
to go the route.
I'm sure Boris Karloff loved that.
Yeah.
Like, he's like, wait a minute, I get to actually, like, speak,
Yeah.
and I don't just gotta, like, go,
Yeah.
yeah.
But then we have the Mummy, which I think is so interesting when they tried to do this dark universe thing
Yes.
in like 2016, 17, whenever
Tom
that was.
Cruise's thing.
Yeah, it's like but by the way, I was watching the NHL playoffs, and the Mummy was one of the things that was really advertised. So every time they came back from commercial break, I had to hear Doc Hendricks go, "The Mummy and theaters May 17." I'm like, oh my! If I hear that one more goddamn. But to start with the Mummy is very surprising because, like, I think the Mummy is one of the more easily forgettable ones of this franchise.
It
Like,
is.
we got Karloff back playing Imhotep.
Yeah.
And because there's like, it's not much to, like, he comes back to life and he sees a woman that reminds him of his lost love, and he kind of wants to, like, force her to be his wife, and it's just kind of like, this is just uncomfortable.
That doesn't work. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, though, like, you can still see, even if it's everything wrong with it, like the yearning for love, like there still is like a longing and a wanting from all of these characters.
Yes.
You know, whether it's acceptance or love or to be left alone even. So even though he's doing everything disgustingly, there is something to be said for his yearning for a life that he once remembered.
I do think the Mummy, though, also has somewhat, like, prejudice against Egyptian culture in it.
Yeah.
You know? Like, it does, and it's, again, because it's a early, film that, just like with Dracula, kind of has, like, those elements of fear of the other. It kind of does mock a little bit of the Egyptian culture.
Well, the funny thing was, when I was a kid in history class, we only learned about, like, the time of the pharaohs, and
Yes.
it's like, if you weren't really paying attention, you would just assume that Egypt just disappeared after the pyramids. It's still there.
Yeah, yeah.
It's still a
there. It's
country.
there's still a country.
There's like people and stuff.
a lot of people are descendants from the people that disappeared.
Yeah.
Like I know I get that vibe whenever I watch them. It's like, this is kind of like not good a representation of Egyptian culture.
Yeah. But then, after the Mummy, like, they really started to crack down on these type of movies, and for the longest time, they kind of just the well dried up, so to speak. And it was actually, interestingly, theaters started to show old prints of horror movies, to kind of like save their movie houses, because there was always this call for them. And I remember one theater ran, I think it was Dracula, Frankenstein, and Son of Kong. Interestingly,
Son of Kong.
Yeah, they had it right. They had it in the back, and people just droves of people went to this,
Yeah.
and this got back to them, to kind of like to the studios, to Universal, like, Hays Code be damned, we're gonna keep making these.
Well, they also
these
started
movies.
making sequels to them.
Oh,
You started seeing a ton of these sequels get made.
right. Oh no, thankfully not till a little further down the line. So we still
40s.
have, we have, one of the fascinating films in this universe is the Wolfman, because it is made by a Jewish man who fled persecution
Yeah.
under the tyrannical fascist rule of Nazi Germany. And if you take a look at the Wolfman, his whole thing is he's persecuted for what he can't control, and he has to hide who he is.
Yeah. Sounds familiar.
Yeah, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah, Talbot is the name of the Wolfman who is forced to hide his true nature from a world that would hunt him down and kill him for what he is, for what they perceive him to be.
Right.
Which, so yeah,
Which
I
is an
think that's
interesting
fascinating.
take on the Wolfman, because
Yeah.
I don't really think you don't really see that in any werewolf style movie that's come
No.
since. Like, I guess you could say like American Werewolf in London, kind of to some
Yeah.
degree, but it's different. you know, and maybe it is because of the fact that the filmmaker behind it is looking at it as, you know, I literally was running for my life here.
Yeah.
And you have that experience of life, injected it into a movie that, you know, film twas like us will get. But a audience might not see that, you know.
And a lot of old anti-Semitic tropes are that, you know, is that like he was terrifying, almost a man like a wolf. It's, you know, it's all there historically. Yep. If you dig into the dirt long enough, you'll find that kind of stuff. But moving on from that film, interestingly, The Invisible Man is such an interesting movie
because it's a weird movie.
Because he's just an asshole.
He's an asshole jerk scientist.
Yeah, from the beginning.
He is an asshole jerk scientist. That's what it is. And it's something that, like, when you look at Hollow Man, which I think is a more faithful adaptation of that Invisible Man character, because the scientist in that is also a fucking jerk.
Yeah, sweet Kevin Bacon movie.
Sweet Kevin Bacon. Yeah.
But yeah, he loses more and more of his humanity as he goes, even though he started like an 8. You know,
great VFX in that one, by the way.
Oh yeah,
that was one. They were using like, I forget the name of the technique, but it was one of like the first uses of using like black mats, and like he literally had like a black material over him when he was doing a lot of those Invisible Man things to be able to then superimpose behind him the scene, and it's led the way into using, you know, green and blue and even yellow screen late, you know, earlier in the 50s than it, you know, before. But it's great use of visual effects for 19. I think it was what, the 40s.
Yeah,
is that early 40s?
Yes, yeah, it was like 42 or 43 around there. Yeah. And only on his deathbed does he have any level of redemption. And what's interesting is that when he dies, that's the only time he becomes human again.
Yeah.
You know, it's like only at his death does he actually.
Funny, interesting with that
himself.
One is just like he loses humanity because he realizes he no longer has consequences because he's not seen. The lack of consequences, the lack of accountability is what turns him into the villain, because he's like, well, I can do whatever the fuck I want. No one will know it was me.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me a little bit, and this is getting super film toi of me, of how we use social media to hide behind.
Yeah. Make a dummy account so you can say something racist or
and
sexist.
Say horrible, disgusting things. And it's like, well, I don't have accountability because no one knows it was me.
Yeah.
Because I can just hide behind this. So, like that, it's kind of plays in both, you know?
Yeah. And interestingly, you know, near the very, very end of what I call the true run of this is The Creature from the Black Lagoon, which I would say is...
I'd say that's the last one.
Yeah, because like this is also around the time of like the monster boom or B-movie monster boom was kind of coming in from everybody's starting to catch up to Universal.
Yep.
And it's so funny for a character that doesn't speak and is kind of thrust into the human world is possibly the most empathetic of all of these.
Because he doesn't know any better.
Yeah, he's not doing anything, and
he's like, you're in my fucking swamp.
Yeah. I mean, to the point where Guillermo del Toro made The Shape of Water.
Yeah.
Which is basically just...
The Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Yeah, which he said, like, I wanted the creature from the Black Lagoon and the lady to, like, get together.
And they do.
And that's what... So I made this movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, that's another example of... we got this love triangle of lady and science guy and boat guy. I'm sorry, but that's who they are. Science guy and boat guy.
Science guy and boat guy.
And even though the Creature from the Black Lagoon is the most interesting character... he's Gilman. Like he dies, and we're supposed to feel like, yay, our white heroes saved the day. Boatman and Science Man, they saved the day. Whoever the hell they were.
Boatman and Science Man.
Because at the end of the day, as you said, the Creature from Black Lagoon is destroyed for no other reason except being unknown and different.
Yeah.
So, as the 40s continue on, as you mentioned, they kind of petered out on terms of like newer, fresh, and then we got Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, and Frankenstein goes to the DMV, and
Frankenstein goes to the DMV,
and Wolfman does Dracula's dishes, and all these movies.
It's just the idea of what we see now with a lot of franchises is that they get played out. You maybe have the best intentions, like Dracula's Daughter, which is the direct sequel to Dracula, is actually pretty good. Like it's It's a different style of movie than obviously the original, but you know, you mentioned about how Bride of Frankenstein has queer tropes in it, and that, but Dracula's Daughter is very much a queer movie. But you know, after that, it's more or less like, how can we shoehorn Dracula and Frankenstein and the Mummy and more of these movies? So you're almost getting kind of like the MCUification of the Universal monsters. And it's history repeating itself now. Because now we're seeing that with the MCU, we're seeing that with Star Wars, where it's like, how many more universes can we have where we jam these characters in? And eventually, it's going to crash and burn.
Did you see that 6-episode Son of Kong streaming thing on Disney Plus? Yeah.
But it's something where, you know, that the message to take from that is that only lasts for so long.
Right.
Because I'm pretty sure once you hit Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein, it's done.
Yeah, now it's a joke. Now it's like we're having some ha-has at its expense. But I do think it would have petered out organically anyway, as time changed, so does what we represent in our horror. And so this is, you know, the rise of the nuclear age, Cold War, atomic bomb. Yeah. And the idea of somebody being terrifying in Transylvania or a Frankenstein monster being made overseas, like, no, this can come to our doorstep at any time. So we're going to get a lot more homemade horror now.
The funny thing with that is that you never had a movie about the bomb being dropped on you, did you?
Not until like the 70s,
right.
80s.
Right. That's the thing. Is the whole atomic age thing is interesting because they never once had a movie about this country's going to blow you up with an atom bomb. It was only once you had like criticism of the governments in general that it suddenly became, that's the real scary thing. Not this giant spider and giant insect and giant lizard creature or something like that. It's the fact that a country could decide to blow you up tomorrow for, you know, some reason.
For rubbing them the wrong way.
Rubbing them the wrong way.
Yeah. they somebody peed in their Cheerios this morning.
Yes.
And we're all going to blow up now.
Yes.
So for these movies, I feel that like why they stand the test of time. I first want to suggest, or the romantic reason for it, being that, you know, before I get to the more cynical, maybe more logical reason of it, but the romantic thing I think is that they stand the test of time because they broke new ground to begin with. But then these characters, while they originally wanted you to connect with the human characters, I think that if you ever felt othered in your life, like, you can relate to the monsters, and the fact that a lot of them are built with empathy attached. I think that you can watch these movies at any time, at any age, or any generation, and that still permeates to this day.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the big thing is that there's a lot of emotions tied with these characters. You know, if you look at it from the standpoint of, this is the first time that anyone really en masse saw these characters on film. You know, there's something to be said for that. I think on top of that, the other reason they stand the test of time is that the circumstances in which they were seen was because people en masse were trying to escape the reality of not knowing if you're going to have food tomorrow. The reality of your parents could be fired tomorrow, or you might not have work tomorrow, or you might be standing in a bread line tomorrow, or, you know, in the case of, you know, rising fascism, that, you know, this country over here could decide to start World War II. So I think there's something to be said for the circumstances the audience is watching this, and, you know, attaching those emotions to these characters that gave them a minuscule hour break from a world that was horrible. I think there's something to be said for that. I also think that's why, and again, kind of getting contemporary, I think that's why superhero movies are what they are now. I think that's why Marvel really blew up in 2008. What else happened in 2008, John?
In 2008,
the Great Recession.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So,
I remember I was here at the Erie Horror Fest when my films was showing, and I remember I went over to like the cafe next door to grab food, and I remember George Bush coming out to talk about the recession. I'm like, recession? We going in one of them? Yes, and
but that's what I mean is when the world is on fire, people for the most part need a break from the horribleness. So where do they go? They go to entertainment, and at this time, that was the entertainment. The Universal monster movies. Now, to get started on the cynical reason.
Yeah.
I think the biggest cynical reason that these movies stand the test of time, television.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Television. That's it.
They were easy. They were easy for the Friday night frights. The late night TV.
If you think about it from the idea that the first generation of people who watch these movies saw them in a theater. Mm. You've got this new rise, maybe 20 or 10, 20 to 15 years later, where it is that these programs are being broadcast now on TV because TV at this time is a new medium. Mm-hmm. Then they're looking for programs, and they have no desire to really invest a crap ton in this new thing called television with original programs. Well, why don't we just take movies that were popular 10 to 15 years ago and broadcast them out? And now you're hitting an entirely new generation. The sons and daughters of that or first generation that saw it in theaters now are finding it.
And I think besides the adaptations of these, like continuing on, as I mentioned, Hammer's Dracula, and then you have.
I could do a whole episode on Hammer's Dracula,
and then then Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is a mouthful. They just continue to evolve in different times, but I think that marketing plays such a big thing in it because they're icons of the season. Like how many times I look through around Halloween time, I look through old commercials, and it's like Frankenstein having to get Little Caesars for Bride of Frankenstein,
or Reese's cups getting sucked with the peanut butter, right? Like it's a common thing you see around this time of the year.
Yeah, or root beer ad with Dracula, or so whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And then therefore there's toys, there's merchandise. I remember when I was a little kid, I got a gift, or I think it was around Christmas time, from the Ghostbusters line of like the original monsters on that, and it was Frankenstein.
I had the Dracula one. But one where it's push the little legs together and its mouth open up. I had that one. Yeah.
But what's interesting to me is that if you look at something like marketing, how Beetlejuice only wore the black and white suit for about 4 minutes in the movie, but that's what he's synonymous for. They never say the word Ewok in Return of the Jedi, but we all know that they're Ewoks. Is that now the monster has become Frankenstein? Not Frankenstein's monster, but because marketing, it's easier to go, here's Frankenstein. This green guy with bolts in his neck. He's Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And so I think, as long as there is money to be had or money to be made, you're gonna see these things are never gonna completely disappear.
No, I don't think there's anyone who could say that one day that Bela Lugosi's Dracula is not going to be plastered somewhere. Yeah, he has become so iconic, along with the Mummy and the Wolfman and Frankenstein's monster, that they're literally. It's literally icons of Halloween, and of horror in general. Like I think that's the thing. When people think of horror movies, one of the first images that comes to mind is Frankenstein or Dracula.
Yeah, like dark and stormy castle and that.
And that's why it's a trope. That's why it's a trope.
Yeah.
But I guess my question to you, John, is what do you think? The current crop of horror movies can learn from the Universal monster movies.
I think what was so beautiful about what they were doing was that they just got these filmmakers got the keys to the kingdom, and they said, well, we're going to sink or swim with these, but we're going to let you go ahead and make them as you see fit with some parameters that they had to work with back then. So because
they were in the studio system, so that's important to know. These are not indie films.
So you get a sense of like Bride of Frankenstein, where this guy's like, hey, I got a certain outlook. I got a certain thing. Like, I think I could make this movie. And they went, yeah, just make it so we can put it out there. Yeah. And I think, like, trusting in your filmmaker and taking chances as much as you can in that time is what sets those apart. And, we look at the disastrous Universal Monsters
reboot.
Or extended universe.
Yeah.
Where it's like everything has to fit within, like, this parameter for these movies. And, and you have to introduce these. And it's like, what was so beautiful about these movies was it wasn't purposeful.
Right.
It wasn't. It was like, what can we get the rights to? People really like this horror stuff. Like, well, what about Wolfman? Can we get the rights to that? Yeah, okay, let's make it. They don't all have to fit together.
Right.
You know, and you can just appreciate them one by one from filmmakers that were given the keys to the kingdom. And I think there's something beautiful about that. And that's why people hold on to them. They're genuine.
Yeah. I think it's the one thing I would say for current crop of horror is to craft characters that have staying power.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the big thing. There's something to be said for the design of characters like Frankenstein, the design of characters like Dracula. You know, books had them very different.
Yeah.
You know, very different. But the design, that creating that character that instills fear, that sticks with you, there's something said for that. And I think like movies like Terrifier have figured that out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you create Art the Clown, and Art the Clown now has basically become like that's representative of new horror.
Yeah.
So for filmmakers out there who are like, I want to create the next horror movie, think about what your monster looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Think about what are they doing? Are they visually conveying the feeling you want to get to the audience? Because if they're not, then you got to redesign it. Yeah. Good talk.
Yeah.
Good
I mean,
talk.
it's
We
clear.
got very film tour on this one,
Yeah.
too.
I was going to say, it's very clear that Brian and I are Universal Monster obsessed.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
definitely.
I designed my kitchen with 10 things of Universal Monster movies. Like, yeah. But
But good talk. So, John, where can they find you at on the internets?
let's see. Facegram.
Facegram,
Instabook.
Instabook.
Yeah. And Chwumble.
Twumble.
That's Twitter Bumble.
Twitter
I'm
Bumble.
Not, actually, I'm
Gotcha.
not on Bumble anymore. But yeah, all those
Not
ones.
on Bumble anymore.
Not anymore. Not anymore. I don't need to be. Yeah. But, you know, I'm sure you guys could read through the lines of what I was saying there. But also, please check me out on YouTube at JDubs Video Nasties. It is spooky season now for me. Unless you're listening to this in March, which if you are, thank you.
Well, it's still spooky season for you.
Yeah, it's always
It's
spooky
always
season. Yeah.
You can find me at Brian Collington on Twitter. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Psycho Show. Of course, we are also on the TikToks for our Gen Z and millennial folk at Cinema Psycho Show. There. We're also on Discord. So if you want to keep the discussion of the Universal Monsters going, head over to our Discord. The link for it is in the description of this episode. And also reach out to us at cinemapsychoshow.com. That's our website. And be sure to follow us and listen to us wherever you listen to podcasts. But you can also get to us at cinemapsychoshow.com/follow. Seriously, go there, click the little button, and you'll be able to subscribe to us right there. And with that said, we will see you next time.
Hey, Jim, is that a mute monster over there that just desperately wants to know what we're doing? Yeah, let's set it on fire.
Okay, science man.